Hey, howdy, hey. Sorry, should have probably opened this before I went live. Little Pamplemousse La Croix, which is a favorite. Hello, hello. Just me for live stream this week, which I know has been unusual the last little bit, but it's nice to just be hanging with y'all. So welcome. And this week is an exciting topic. This was something I've gotten a couple of requests for, and I thought this might be a fun one to do live, which is talking about classics written by women, or at least women-identified people. Note, I wore my Alcott Austin Bronte and Plath t-shirt. I think I've got a link in the description if you're interested in it. This is a new fave. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get my head in the game to talk about classics because I have been on a deep dive with Dance Moms the last few days because I accidentally caught a video that Amanda Beebe made about Dance Moms, and I was like, this seems like a hot garbage mess. I never really watched when it was live, and so I've started watching it, and for some reason I can't stop watching this monster yell at talented 10-year-olds, so there you go. Anyway. Welcome everybody who is in the stream. Yay, I'm glad that people are excited for this one. I think this will be an interesting conversation. Part of why I wanted to do it live was to provide some of my thoughts, but also get some crowdsourcing. Hello to Ottawa. Same glasses, yes. This is the Toto Bologna. I now have in two colors because I like it so much. Hello to Canada. Hello. Yay, I'm glad people are excited. So we're going to talk about classics written by women, as I mentioned. A couple of caveats or like just thoughts here before I get into the actual recommendations. One is, so I feel like I need to say this now. I had a video about classics go like, I guess, viral for BookTube. And one of the kind of pieces of, I don't know, feedback. Sometimes it was feedback, sometimes it was harshly stated critique. But people often talk about, they'll comment on like, hey, the nice version of this is these seem to be a lot of English-speaking recommendations, which is true. I am a native English speaker, and in terms of things that have been kind of put into my radar most prominently over the years does tend to be books from the English-speaking world. I am totally not meaning to discount classics from other countries. I do have, I don't know in this particular video, but in general, I've also read some French classics because that is also a language I read. And I've read a smattering of Russians. But that, aside from the US, the UK, and those two countries, that does tend to be where a lot of my references for classics come from. So just know that that's kind of just the bias or taint or tilt of this particular video. Not trying to discount classics from other places, just sort of a bias of where I'm from and the languages I speak. So hopefully everybody will just take this in the spirit with which it is offered, but just wanted to note that as sort of a bias on my part or sort of where I'm coming from. I also love Agatha Christie. Hello. Oh, welcome to live. Yes. Oh yeah. I've been into my bookish apparel recently. Hello. Lots of people here. Dance Moms. Yeah, it is. I don't think it's one, like, I think it's going to burn hot and bright. I specifically know that there's something coming at the end of season 4 that I want to watch, but yeah. It's a lot of a very monstrous woman yelling at talented children. So, hello, we got people just all over the US, Mexico, everything. Yeah, this is basically kind of the long and the short of it. Danielle, translated classics are great, but weren't really covered in school where I went, which is a shame. It definitely had some, but I just want to be clear on, that's just the perspective I'm coming from. Hello to Florida. Hello to Chile. Okay. Well, so I kind of gave a little disclaimer, and then also I just wanted to, before I even got into recommendations, just reflect on why this might be something people have been requesting or something that is worth doing. I think when I was getting my list together, part of what I was realizing is that there actually are, plenty of great classics by women, and even classics that I feel like are pretty well known by women. Um, what I think what is not as like I think where there may be some disparity or the feeling that there's not as many women is sort of like if we were tier ranking classic authors, there are just not as many women who fall into sort of that top tier of classics authors. Really, I think, um, we've got Charlotte Bronte slash kind of the Brontes in general, but really mostly Charlotte, or just them as a group. And then we've got Jane Austen. I think that those are really the two women who are grouped with the Dickens and, the Thomas Hardy. Like some of those ones that are just so ubiquitous, so well taught, the Mark Twains in the US or the, Nathaniel Hawthorne's or whatever. Oh yes, I do love these editions. This is the Chiltern edition, which is very beautiful. It reminds me of like a really fancy Bible. So I've been enjoying these editions, but really I think in terms of sort of that A tier, there are just so few women who are kind of ubiquitous and on all the syllabi and all like a huge part of curriculum and kind of who gets talked about. I think that's why there's this feeling that women are not as represented in classics. The other thing is, I think that there are more male authors, at least in the English speaking world, who have multiple classics. And that's part of what builds their prestige, is it's that they're not just sort of the more one-offs. So for instance, Louisa May Alcott came to mind. Alcott. This Little Women is definitely a widely read, widely loved classic, but really this is like the one from her that people know. So I think that's the other piece of it, is that there's not as many female authors of classic literature who just have like an entire oeuvre or an entire body of work that is considered to be as prestigious as there are men who have, like a Steinbeck, where he has multiple ones that people love, or Shakespeare, or whoever. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is, I do think, while I'm holding this up, and I guess another one we'll talk about is Heidi, but the other thing is, I think a lot of the classics that have female authors tend to be children's classics, which I also think is part of why maybe the prestige of women in classics is not as high. So anyway, I was just reflecting on, because when I was going through, I was like, oh God, yeah, I've got plenty of female authors that I could recommend for this. But I think that there's a feeling that there's not as many because of just sort of the kind of prestige or body of work that a lot of these women have. So anyway, that's just sort of some of my thoughts or reflections on that. And let's see here. This is a great point that women used to use men's name to get published. That is true. The Brontes all had male pseudonyms that they were using. So it was, I believe, Acton. I forget what the other ones were, but they were using Bell as their last name and then male first names. George Eliot, who we will talk about. So that certainly in the past was also a piece of the puzzle, was that it was women who wrote novels. It was harder for their novels to be taken as seriously. Hey, Alexa. I got these from Book Depository, but I think that Amazon also has it, and Bookshop. Once this goes live, I will try to put links for people who are interested in the specific editions, if I can get a good link for them. But these are the Chiltern editions, and they are very lovely and easy to read. I was rereading something out of one of these the other day, and it's nice to hold, nice to read. Yes, I'm so glad you're reading Jane Austen. It is my all-time favorite book, so I highly endorse this. Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, they're beautiful. Does Virginia Woolf count as a classic author? Yes. So in terms of how I'm going to periodize this, I'm going to say what I tend to say is that books up through 1950, I count as sort of like a traditional classic. And then roughly 1950 to 2000-ish, I would consider to be like a modern classic. For now, that's kind of where my head's at. But yeah, that's so in that rubric, I would consider Virginia Woolf to be a traditional classic. Yeah, Edith Wharton is on my list, and she's definitely someone who has multiple books, but I don't think she's one that's kind of on the bubble. I think her and Virginia Woolf are two that I kind of think are close to being at the Austen Bronte tiering, but I don't think she's quite at that same kind of like well-knownness. Wuthering Heights. Well, I definitely prefer Jane Eyre, but Wuthering Heights is also great. What is the typical periodization used to determine if a book falls into a classic? I just don't think there's a great consensus. I've seen a lot of people arguing that traditional classics should go up into the First World War, and then after that should be modern. But I don't know. I mean, we're talking about 100 years ago at that point. So I think that that's a little conservative. That's why I've gone through 1950, because at this point that would be 70 years ago. So I don't know. I don't think that there's like a standard. That's just how I tend to think about it. Yeah, Mary Shelley is a good example well, maybe we can segue into a few where I'm like, I think that they have like one that people know from them. So yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a great book. It's a classic. It's very formative for an entire genre of sort of monster horror. But the reality is this is like the book that she is known for. And then To Kill a Mockingbird is sort of a modern classic from Harper Lee. This is the book that Harper Lee is known for. So yes, it's considered to be a modern classic. This is considered to be a classic. But I think because they don't have a bunch of other books, they kind of get forgotten a little bit sometimes, or kind of lost in the mix. I don't know. I get kind of a different vibe, or like, I feel like there's a different, sorry, looking at this, trying to figure out where this can go. There's a different sort of weight to how their books are perceived, at least in my opinion. Yes, L.M. Montgomery, I almost pulled Anne of Green Gables. But yeah, I would put her in there too. I also think that there's now a small but growing movement to bring back a lot of classics books written by women authors that had largely been forgotten, ties your point about prestige. Yeah, I think that there's, in general, I talked about this in my video essay about historical accuracy, but I think in general, because we're now in a place like as a society where we're valuing different voices and sort of more marginalized voices in pretty much all spheres of life, there is, I think, sort of a kind of reclamation project happening to look for classics by women, classics by people of color, classics by queer people, like just trying to broaden what the canon means, at least in European/American literature. This also gets into an entire, like, we could go to a whole sidetrack about like, should we even talk about a canon? I think that there's really compelling arguments on both sides. For the sake and the sort of conceit of this idea or this topic, we're going to just sort of like acknowledge the fact that there are books that have stood the test of time in a way that other books of their time period have not. But I think that this is a great point, that there is some sort of like literary archaeology that's ongoing to try to, sort of like find these older works that probably should have stood the test of time, but maybe didn't get audience or prestige because of certain biases of their time period. For instance, the Virago Modern Classics line, I really love that. There's, here's an example of one. This is my copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. These are beautiful books, but the whole Virago line is specifically celebrating classics and modern classics by women. So if you are looking for some like kind of more obscure classics from women, then I think that this is a great line. They're also super affordable, I think, and are very beautiful. So yeah, I think that we will continue to see, more and more kind of new classics entering the canon. Yes, Anne of Green Gables is definitely a classic. Women didn't usually write about issues that were seen as edgy, at least not directly, and women's concerns were important to the intelligentsia of the time too. Yeah, I think that this is a really good point, Lauren, and I think very true. I mean, I think that there's sort of the old, like, when women write about domestic things, it's like light and fluffy, but when men do it, they're, great works of art. I think there's certainly a bias there. Like, for instance, I mean, we could go into a whole thing about Franzen. I think if Franzen wasn't a literary dude bro, his particular type of novel would not be perceived in the same way. Like, I just think, I mean, nothing is irrefutable, but like, to my mind, there's not really another way to look at that the whole scenario. So yeah, I would just say that I think that there are definitely biases baked into like what's considered to be great literature and like what things are deserving, like what topics are deserving of that, who the kind of person is who writes that kind of book, et cetera, et cetera. So Orlando, yes, that's actually, I think I'm going to put that on my classics TBR next year. That's a Virginia Woolf one I have not yet read, but Persephone Press publishes out-of-print books by vintage female authors and sometimes a few overlooked male authors. Okay, there you go. So that's a another potential line for people who are interested. I feel like periodization will have to keep moving. Eventually, books published in 1990s and 2000s will be classics too. I wonder if we'll change the name for 18th and 19th century classics then. Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think as time hopefully continues to progress, things will be entering the status of classic more and more. Like, for instance, I feel like Toni Morrison, I mean, in terms of the periodization, it feels like her work should still be considered modern classics, but I feel like she's one of those authors who just, with how, and actually, speaking to the bias I have for more sort of like traditional classics versus modern ones, now that I even say that, I think Morrison is probably the other female author I would put up with Austen and Bronte as somebody who has not just that one big book, but several. And that sort of therefore can kind of get to that same kind of A-tier prestige of classics. So that's a bias on my part in terms of like a recency bias, because I'm like, well, she only just passed. Like, is she really fully classic yet? And it's like, yeah, I mean, I think Toni Morrison is probably the other female author who comes to mind whose canon writ large is sort of entering the kind of consensus on, yes, this is literature that's going to stand the test of time. Jen Campbell and Jean from Jean Bookish Thoughts are where I heard about Persephone Press. Yeah, I love Jean's channel. I'm such a fangirl. I really want to read more classics from my country, Brazil, and I really want to try Clarice Lispector. I've seen that name raised a few times when I have mentioned that I'm hoping in the coming years to kind of broaden my horizons a little bit. So you'll have to let me know how you do with that. Yeah, there you go. Persephone Press. I'll have to look those up. Yeah, the cloth-bound Frankenstein is one of my favorite designs. Okay, yeah, we're getting into some of the folks who I'm going to be recommending. Yeah, I think Toni Morrison is definitely a modern classic. What about genre classics? Yeah, and here's another, I get in my head about this because I did pull a representative Agatha Christie, because at this point, her books are coming up on 100 years old. They are classics of mystery, but I do think that they are just kind of classics generally. And if so, I think she is certainly sort of at that same level as Austen and the Brontes, because she just has like this huge backlist. I think the thing is, I don't feel like Christie has the same level of scholarship for her work that some of these other authors do, which I do think is a function of the fact that she is a woman who was writing popular fiction for its time. But I mean, you guys know, if you watch this channel, I certainly have an interest. I've got like a whole little library section here and then out in my living room of, literary studies of mystery. I think that this will continue to be an area that grows, sort of like the genre literary studies. And again, this probably is indicative of some of my biases of, I tend to think of part of what has things entering the canon being considered to be great literature is the amount of like teaching that happens. This does introduce all these thorny things about like, okay, but should we really be teaching some of these works of literature to high school students in the way that they get taught, and like all of the biases baked in? This is like a whole other topic. So I'm just you just heard my confliction. All that to say, I do think, especially once genre classics pass a certain, like once they're old enough, I do think that they start to just kind of lose their status of genre classic and just become classics writ large. Like, for example, I would say that about the Sherlock Holmes books. I think that it's been long enough that people don't think of it as just a genre classic at this point. I don't know. So, yeah, you can just hear that I feel very conflicted about that, but I think it's a really interesting point. Sorry, I had to block a troll there. Valancourt Books has been republishing classic and out-of-print horror stories and books from women in their Monster She Wrote series. Well, I absolutely love that name, and we will talk about at least one horror author, but I will have to seek that out. The Second Shelf Bookshop in London, which only sells rare and first edition by women authors. Well, the next time I'm in London, I will certainly have to look that up. Yeah, Jules Verne. That I was thinking of Jules Verne and like Robert Louis Stevenson. Like, I think that those have sort of entered just the general classic canon after a while. Shirley Jackson is on my list of ones to talk about, so we'll come back to this. I consider her modern, but she's on the bubble, kind of like Flannery O'Connor for me. So Margaret, at the beginning of this, I kind of talked about, I do have just like a bias for classics originally published in English. I will probably, I do talk about French and Russian classics on occasion, but just the caveat here for this in general is mostly focused on English, or English in the original translation, because some of that is also just like a function of what I have easy access to. Yeah, I tend to think of Christie that way. I read something short by Colette when I was in college. Maybe it was I don't remember. I'll have to go back and look. But yes, I read a little something. I've read a lot of like excerpts from French authors because they would like kind of be pulled in as a assignment or whatever in my minor. But yeah, as they become older, it's like the historical interest increases the prestige in people's eyes. And I would also really, for me in particular, I have that bias because that is such a huge part of my particular enjoyment of classics, is their function not only as a work of literature, but as an artifact of history. And in fact, if we were really going to get into like a full conversation about how classics are taught, I would argue that actually classics, I think, often would be best served as being a part of a history curriculum as opposed to an English or a literature curriculum. So anyway, but yes, I think that that's a part of it. Yeah, and Hannah, it may not be that I can't speak to how, for instance, in Canada or other English-speaking countries, how this works, but at least where I grew up, the curriculum is heavily focused on male classics, and really even into university. Yeah. Oh, we're gonna get there. I've got her sitting over here, and after we got her too. Okay, so people are wonderfully, presaging some of the ones I was going to talk about. So maybe I'll just get to some of these recommendations. So I'll try to hit some of the ones people have already referenced, and then maybe a couple of others. Okay, so just grab this little stack of editions. So first, somebody was talking about Catherine Porter. I really enjoy her short stories. So if you're somebody looking for interesting short stories, a lot of similar vibes, I think, to Flannery O'Connor, but she's definitely got her own thing. But she has a couple of big ones that tend to get taught. Like, I think what was that specific one called? I can't find it. There's one of hers that I think gets put into a lot of kind of compilations that you get in school. But anyway, Catherine Ann Porter short stories I think are fantastic. Flannery O'Connor is one of my all-time favorite authors and probably my favorite short story writer of all time. She's another one that's kind of on the bubble between traditional classic and modern classic. But I absolutely love her work, I think, as a reflection of kind of just Southern literature in general. I think she's kind of got an outsider-insider perspective on the South of the mid 20th century because she was a Catholic, which definitely in kind of Southern popular religion is a kind of minority position. So I think she has a lot of really interesting critical things to say about the American Southern experience and a very incisive moral vision, I think, of kind of what she just has a very specific, I think, point of view that comes through. She's an original. Like, I don't think there's a ton of people doing similar things to what she did. I will say Shirley Jackson does have, I think, some similar gothy vibes to Flannery O'Connor. But again, I just love her short stories. The Lottery is the one that she is best known for, but I really have enjoyed every short story from her I've ever read. The Haunting of Hill House is an all-time favorite for me. I need to reread We Have Always Lived in the Castle, but she's another one I think of, like when I think of favorite authors, she's one that kind of comes to mind for me. Some other ones that have already been mentioned. We got Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and actually I'm going to be reading Jamaica Inn this month, so I'm excited for that. This is the only one I've ever read from her, but I would like to definitely read more. So I realize this print is kind of trippy the more you look at it, but yeah, Rebecca. There's actually also a big adaptation recently, though it did star Armie Hammer, so not sure if that's still available on Netflix or not, but in theory. That one also just got a big new adaptation. I love the Alfred Hitchcock adaptation. It's fantastic. Other ones people talked about already. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway. I'm a sucker for it. I love it. She's another one that I think is probably pretty close to the Austen Bronte level. She's one I would definitely put up there as being kind of close to that tier. So I've got other ones we'll talk about, but I think those were most of the ones that I saw people mention already. So let me catch back up here. Yeah, that's the thing. I love literature as a window into history, which I know is not everybody's mode of reading, but for me, that's one of the most rich and rewarding parts of reading older books. Which author would I recommend for people new to this? Well, I do have a whole video. I'll try to remember to link that. I do say my kind of go-to recommendation if you've never read a classic and you want to give it a try is Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, just because it's a story that's been told so many times that I think people kind of know a lot of the beats of the story. The language is still pretty accessible, though I will say one of my other recommendations is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I just read this last month, and I think that this would actually be a great first classic for people because the writing style is very legible to contemporary readers. Anne Bronte is not the best known of the Brontes, but I think that this is the second best Bronte I've ever read behind Jane Eyre. So I think it's a story people can connect to, has a lot of really vivid, interesting characters. And also if you're a nerd, a history nerd like me, there's a lot of interesting like time period stuff happening in this one. So yeah, Isabella Allende, she's one that I have on my like to be read pile. But yeah, she's definitely a name that I think gets brought up a lot for modern classic. I would say Louise Erdrich here in the States, I feel like has a similar place of she's kind like verging into the classics canon. I think she will make it in there. Okay, Barbara Pym. Yes, this is she is definitely on my list. Excellent women. I would say that if you love Jane Austen, you have not read Barbara Pym, I would recommend you give her a try. She is writing in the, I forget the decade, but the early part of the 20th century. So it's not the same time period, but in terms of sort of like sharply observing British life, she has a lot of the same kind of DNA in her work. And I think she's a real crowd pleaser for people who give her a try. So Excellent Women is the one that I would recommend, but she is an absolute treat. That is very lucky. Women teachers who are teachers who are very pointedly including women writing. Yeah, I was not so lucky, but there you go. Oh, thank you. Yes, I will try to remember to have a link below. Yes, we got some Barbara Pym love. She is fantastic. About not reading classics in the US. I think most US classics by women tend to be short story writers and essayists. I think that is true. There's a lot more women included in sort of like the short story units as opposed to like a full novel. Elizabeth Gaskell, this is my next recommendation. So there we go. I know that North and South is the one that North and South or Wives and Daughters are the ones that get mostly recommended. I think Cranford would be where I would tell people to start just because it is pretty short. It's originally, it was originally, I think, like short stories. And it's very funny. It's a very funny book, very ironic, and I think just surprising. Like, I don't know that you would expect this kind of book from a Victorian female author, but here it is. It's about essentially small town life and these sort of like little biddies, but it's very poignant. I found this a very moving book in terms of its observation of sort of the precarity of life for women who just were wholly dependent on men for their economic security in this time period. So I really, really love this book. So that would be my Elizabeth Gaskell recommendation. Yes, Excellent Women. Yes, yes, yes. You know that there's some McKay's barcodes on here. I never remember to take them off. So yeah, okay, Noon Wine. There you go. There's a classic porter. I just read Wuthering Heights and absolutely loved it. I was worried because the language is difficult for me at first, but I jived with it after a little bit. I think that's true for a lot of classics. If you kind of give yourself time to ease into them, usually you can get into the flow, even if the language is a little bit difficult. I would say an example of that is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This is one that I read last year and really enjoyed and was surprised at how plot dense this was. I was under the impression that this was really sort of like a character study. There's actually a lot of plot in here. The thing that I think is a barrier is that it does have a dialect that is written out, which I know is not everybody's favorite, but I think particularly if you sort of read this one out loud in those spots, or I've heard that the audiobook version of this is great, I think people could really get into this once they sort of got in the headspace of it and kind of started jiving with it. So Their Eyes Were Watching God, I guess would be a classic at this point, right? Because I think it's in the 30s. So yeah. I really enjoyed this one. It's always weird when I read a classic and I'm like, yeah, this is great. Because I'm like, well, yeah, it's a classic. Probably is great. It's just sort of like, I don't know. I feel kind of, I never really know how to review them fully. Because I'm like, yeah, like hundreds and thousands of other people before me, I also thought that this was a great book. Like, I don't really know what to say about it. That said, Sylvia Plath was a book for AP Psych. My English teacher let me double up on counting it. Yeah, I had a little list of like women classics I haven't gotten to yet. And actually, I have not yet read The Bell Jar. So that is one that's on my like books I need to read before I die list. My high school education definitely didn't include many women authors either in Ontario, Canada, let alone Canadian women authors, usually British or American. Can I tell you, when I lived in Canada, I specifically asked multiple of my friends who were Canadian, like, okay, while I'm here, I want to read like Canadian literature. Like, give me some recommendations. Give me like, what are the great books of Canada? And they like never really gave me anything to read. They're like, yeah, we mostly just read Americans or British authors in school. So I don't know that we have a lot of those. And I'm like, well, that's a bummer. The only one I got somebody to give me was like Hear the Owl Cry. I forget what it was called. It was set in kind of British Columbia, which is where I was living, and I enjoyed it. But yeah, so anyway. Also in Canada, took an experimental junior high class where the instructors were feminists. Love it. Yes, Flannery O'Connor. So, okay, I will say, so Alexa's recommending Wise Blood, which is one of the novels. I always tell people to start with Flannery O'Connor short stories because I think she is much better at short stories than she is at her novels. But clearly, I mean, people love her novels as well. But okay, Muriel Spark. Yes, one of my picks is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, though I've never read something from Muriel Spark that I did not enjoy. I think I've read all of these in this one, which is The Girls of Slender Means, The Driver's Seat, The Only Problem, and The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. So yeah, there's also a fabulous adaptation of this from the 70s, I think, with Maggie Smith. I think Maggie Smith got an Oscar for it. So it's sort of, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is like a boarding school story. So if you're a sucker for a boarding school story like I am, this is that. And it's like a female, like an all-girls school, and they have this instructor who just like cultivates this sort of like air of mystery around her, and she has her set of girls who she, you know, I don't know, she just like influences their lives forever, basically. But yeah, I love The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. I would say it's one of my favorite books ever, probably. So, you know, rep for Muriel Spark. I have a book from her called Memento Mori I keep meaning to get to, but someday. She is definitely one I enjoy. Yeah, Flannery O'Connor is just a treasure. A Good Man is Hard to Find, or Everything That Rises Must Converge would be where I would start with her. Yeah. Oh, wow. Am I that behind in chat? Yes. Okay. Rebecca, Mrs. Danvers is like one of the all-time creepiest people ever. My cousin Rachel. There you go. Yeah, I just got this beautiful Penguin Vitae edition of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and maybe I'll make that a priority. It's not on my classics list for the year, but maybe I'll do a reread of that this fall, because it is a very, like, I don't know, ooky spooky book. Yeah, Hitchcock is definitely the way to go on that adaptation front. Yes, I do love me some beautiful editions. I frankly also use that, like, if there's a beautiful edition available, as a low-key benchmark as to if something has fully entered the kind of unofficial canon. So there you go. Which author would you say has similar vibes to Shirley Jackson in terms of her very accessible, rich prose? I think Catherine Porter would be a pretty good read alike for sure, or Flannery O'Connor. I think of all three of them as being somewhat similar in vibe. Like, they have like some just like gothy elements in there. I don't know. We'll see what the chat has to say. Yes, that was my takeaways, that Anne Bronte is like underloved to the max. Which of your videos went viral? Yes, Where to Start with Classics. That's the one that has caused me to change many of my comment reviewing policies. Because there's many wonderful comments on there, but there's also a lot of neckbeards being assholes because, you know, how dare a woman not recommend Dostoevsky as a beginner classic. Those are some of my favorite comments. I also had somebody who tried to tell me that the Restoration period was something in American history. And I was like, you mean the Restoration period in England where they restored the king to the throne? Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. That's a YouTube creator tangent that you guys probably don't care about. Yes, Mrs. Dalloway, I love it. So I'm a little picky about stream of consciousness. It's not always my thing, but I really love the way that Virginia Woolf does that. Yeah, Agnes Grey, I'm definitely going to read based on how much I loved The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Yes, I hope people will pick that up. Yeah, I think people absolutely love North and South, mostly because of the Richard Armitage adaptation. It's a good book. I read that last year and I did enjoy it. I think it was a little overhyped to me. Like, I was expecting to adore it, and I really liked it, but I didn't like love it the way I loved The Tenant of Wildfell Hall this year. So Sarah Waters. Yeah, I wouldn't, maybe a modern classic, but I'm not sure she's entered that league yet. Yeah, I think that in general, classics like children's classics or kind of like young adult classics can be a good place to start. I also have a where to start with children's classics video. So if you're intimidated by classics, I do think children's classics can be a good way to sort of break the ice. Yeah. Okay, there you go. I definitely remember reading Harper Lee and Zora Neale Hurston in high school, although they were not presented as traditional classics back then, which would have been the early aughts. Yeah, I think we definitely read To Kill a Mockingbird, I think in 8th grade. So there you go. Welcome. Yeah, okay, so Edith Wharton is on my list. I forgot to pull one of her books, but yeah. The Age of Innocence is probably where I would start with her. And I think she's often she's a contemporary of Henry James, so it's that kind of vibe. I prefer her to what I've read of Henry James, though to be fair, I've not read hardly any Henry James yet because I didn't love what initial outings I had with him. But yeah, Edith Wharton, I think, I don't know. Also, she has some great adaptations. That old Winona Ryder, wasn't she in that version? Or Michelle Pfeiffer, The Age of Innocence adaptation. So there you go. Any recommendations for classics written by women for people who are not a fan of Jane Austen? I get why people like her, but I personally didn't enjoy them. I mean, it would depend on what about her you didn't like. The one that comes to mind for me is our pal George Eliot, who had a male pseudonym but is in fact a lady. Middlemarch, I love this book, and it is also sort of a, if you just didn't like Jane Austen's style, but you want that same kind of like in the country, like, you know, fancy people and their domestic concerns kind of novel, Middlemarch, it has some interesting things about like politics in this. And I think she's coming from a much more aggressive sort of like authorial posture. So yeah, I love Middlemarch. If you're looking for like a door stopper, this is a good one that I think holds up. Oh no, this is like a step backwards. My teachers included women by making us read Ayn Rand. Oh no. I tried to read Ayn Rand just as like a purely like to have read it kind of a thing. And my eyeballs rejected it. It was awful. It was hot water trash. Have you read any biographies on any female authors? And if so, do you have any recommendations? Not that come to mind. I've read a few biographies of Flannery O'Connor. I've got one that I'm going to read hopefully this year called Charlotte Bronte, shockingly enough, by Claire Harmon, but I've not read that yet. Yeah, I don't see any down here, but I'm sure I've read some over the years, but nothing particularly comes to mind. Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell. There you go. I feel like Elizabeth Gaskell has a big enough body of work that I would like to see her. Like her and George Eliot both, it's like they've got enough and enough good ones that I feel like they should level up kind of, but I don't know. We'll see. What's the most accessible work by Woolf to read? The shortest is probably Orlando if you're looking for fiction. If you're cool with trying some nonfiction from her, I would say A Room of One's Own. Did you watch the Bronte BBC drama To Walk Invisible? I did not, but I will have to keep my eyes open for it. Gone with the Wind is probably the longest U.S. classic written by a woman, but it needs such a long conversation around it. Yeah, I tried to read that at some point, and I'm going to say I was like thoroughly underwhelmed, and this was before any of the like, before I had enough like race consciousness to have other critiques of it. I just didn't, purely on like as a book level, it wasn't my favorite, but I said that to someone one time in the comments and was rebuked as being wrong. So take that with a grain of salt. Oh, nice. Yes, I'm always going to tell people to get nice editions. You guys know I'm an absolute sucker for it. I've never read Fanny Burney. No. Yes, I've heard from multiple people that that is a really great audiobook. So yeah, I definitely recommend. It's hard to venture into classics from other countries because there aren't many translations available, and then even less translated work by women. I really agree with that, Mariana. I can only speak for the English-speaking world. We tend to have pretty good access to major French writers and major Russian writers, a few German and a few Italian, and I think increasingly we're also getting works from Latin America available for us and translated into English. But yeah, I mean, of course you can find them, but in terms of things that are like widely circulated and widely like recognized, not as much. So you have to kind of be a little bit more intentional about it, which I take ownership that I have not done that traditionally, and that is something that I'm hoping to change, especially since I'm approaching having read most of the sort of like British classics that I want to read because they're just my favorite, for good or for ill. I'm sure that that has a lot to do with the way that they were taught to me, but I love spoiled rich people sitting around in their country houses complaining about shit. Like I don't know what that says about me, but I do enjoy it. So, yep, we've talked about Anne of Green Gables, Alice Munro. Yeah, I think she's got to be well. And then in terms of like a modern classic or somebody who I think will enter the classic from a female Canadian author perspective, I mean, got to be Margaret Atwood, right? So, yeah, I think Alice Munro is the big one. Canlit had such a rep for many years as dry and dusty and limited in options. It's definitely changed in the last few years, but many will still be hard pressed to name something outside of Ellen Montgomery. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. So I heard the Owl Call My Name. Yes, that was what it was. It was a good book. It was interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting book, but Iris Murdoch. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Quebec has many French language female authors, but blanking on English language ones. We got some good Canadian rep here. Hello. Yes. Welcome, welcome. Hey, Bethany. We got double dipping. Oh, thank you. I'll try to make sure I've got the link if you guys are interested. W.O. Mitchell. Here we go. Wide Sword SOC. Yes. Okay. That was one on my list. I really enjoy this book. I do think that this is when was this written? I want to say this was in the 60s, so maybe a modern classic. Yeah, 1966. This is really good. It's a retelling of sorts of Jane Eyre. It definitely should be read after Jane Eyre if you care about spoilers at all. I really love this book. I do think that it has shaped the perception of Jane Eyre in some ways that I think is decontextualizing the original text in ways I don't love. But this as a book unto itself is absolutely fantastic. So if you have either already read Jane Eyre or you have no interest in reading Jane Eyre and you're looking for like a short modern classic that's really beautiful and I think is a really important piece of kind of the project of problematizing some of the underlying assumptions in a lot of traditional classics, I think that this is absolutely great. So, oh yes, Emily Carr. Emily Carr I was very familiar with because there was like a whole art school nearby that was named for her. So I got to see some like exhibits of her work and whatnot. So. What year are we using as cutoff? Yeah, so I was talking about this earlier. For a traditional classic, I tend to use 1950 as my cutoff, and then I use 1950 to 2000 as my modern classic. Yep. I think Toni Morrison is definitely going to enter. A nonfiction classic recommendation, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Yeah. Hannah Arendt. It's good stuff. Joan Didion, Susan Sontag, Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. The Trick is to Keep Breathing is such an underrated modern classic. I've never heard of that. I'll have to put that on my radar. Yeah, I love George Eliot. I know she's not everybody's bit, but The Giver, yeah, I think I included that as a modern children. Ooh, sorry about that. A modern children's classic. Yeah, I think that she is. I think The Giver will become similar to any number of the other, like Secret Garden, Heidi, etc. Actually, speaking of, for another children's classic I love by Joanna Spyri, Heidi, and this is set in Switzerland. This is the book that made me a reader, so I have a lot of very fond associations with this particular book, so I may be biased, but I do love it. Yep, Wharton, Silas Marner, A Room of One's Own. Yes, Great Minds Think Alike. Number of the Stars is my personal favorite Lois Lowry. I love it. I gave it to my niece for Christmas this year, but I wish Dawn Powell was better known. Someone said she was who really made the jokes Dorothy Parker gets credit for. Hot take. Love it. I did know that Elizabeth Gaskell wrote a Charlotte Bronte biography. She was, I think, pretty formative to sort of the mythos around the Brontes. So, Gone with the Wind. Yeah, it was not for me, but yeah, Ayn Rand, it's like, even if you were okay with her politics, like just as a book, I hated it. So there we go. We still call her George Eliot, other female authors who wrote under pen names too, but we use their real names now. I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. Who knows how maybe she left papers wanting that to be maintained, or maybe that was kind of known to be something she wanted. Am I out of focus? I feel like I'm out of focus. Let me try turning my camera off and on here. Come on. Maybe? Okay, there we go. I think that fixed it. Sorry. It's not like what I look like actually really that matters that much, but it would have bothered me. Eudora Welty. Oh man, have I read a Eudora Welty? Hold, please. I don't think I have. Maybe some of her short stories. Oh, well, no, yeah. Delta Wedding. I knew I'd read one from her. I didn't love Delta Wedding. That's right. Yeah. Did not love Delta Wedding, but she is, definitely a classic female author. So there you go. Until it went to a rant. Yeah, her politics really overshadowed that book for me. So I think as like a piece of history, it's interesting, but as a book, I didn't enjoy it, if that makes sense. Hello. Yeah, I think as Ursula Le Guin, 100% I think is a modern genre classic who I think will enter just the canon writ large at some point. For sure. I think she's a modern classic who will eventually just like fully transition into the canon. Yeah, I'm trying to acknowledge my personal preferences and adjust accordingly. Constance Fenimore Woolson, A Portrait of a Lady Novelist. I love the term lady novelist. Carson McCullers, that's who I was trying to think of. I've got a couple of Carson McCullers books, and I haven't read them yet, but she's on my to-be-read list. The other ones, actually, while I'm on that, I had a few that I put down here as ones that I need to read still. I need to read Carson McCullers. The Scarlet Pimpernel, I've never read and would like to. I mentioned The Bell Jar. And then, fun story, I've never read The Awakening by Kate Chopin, and I was going to read this in high school and got talked out of it because it was too feminist. So I'm assuming I would like it now. Yeah. So that's one that I have a nice copy of, and I'm going to read now. Those are my like big ones that I feel like are sort of on my list of need to get to. What are some of the, did I cover? I'm looking at my little list here. Oh, the only two I've not covered yet. One in terms of sort of like a children's classic, or I guess going back to this whole, the question about nonfiction from a woman, The Diary of Anne Frank, I think is definitely a classic at this point. And, you know, all the more poignant because of the context under which it was written and the fact that it was written by a child and is still so beautiful. If you've never read it, I mean, it really is very, I mean, definitely as a historical document, interesting, but also I think really beautiful in a lot of ways. I don't think just any little girl could have written it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think part of the tragedy of her story is you realize that we lost somebody who was very insightful or an interesting thinker. So that was one. And then a book I read last year, I guess, at the prompting of my friend Brie Hill, who was on live stream last week, was Passing by Nella Larson. This is a really short book, and it's a classic of Harlem Renaissance literature. And this is so thought-provoking. Like, this is one of those ones where there's just like, there's a lot of layers. There's a lot to think about. And it has one of the most like, whoa, endings that I've read in quite some time. So yeah, this one I definitely recommend. I have not read The God of Small Things. Yes, trying to think of plays. Oh yeah, that's a great point. Lillian Hellman for sure. Raisin in the Sun. Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day. Sean Reese. I'm pretty sure, I thought Sean Reese was a woman, but maybe I'm wrong. Am I wrong? I'm going to be very embarrassed if I was, but I assumed, when I heard Jean, I assumed it was a lady. But it could be Jean. Well, okay, maybe, actually, if it was the female Jean, it would have an N-E. So I may be totally wrong here. Oh, no, okay. Jean Reese seemed to many of her contemporaries. Okay, we're good. We're good. Whew. They could at least put both names. Yeah, that's a good point. Girl Interrupted. Yeah, Handmaid's Tale, I think, is a modern classic that will move into the greater canon. I'm going to confess to you guys, I don't love The Handmaid's Tale. I love what it's doing. I love the message of it and like the ideas. But as a book, it is not my favorite. Sorry. If I would much rather take The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter for that same kind of like messaging, which I recently got my friend Bethany to read, and it's fantastic. I guess Angela Carter probably would be considered a modern classic author, so I should have grabbed one of her books because I do love The Bloody Chamber. It's a top 10 favorite book for me. Nice. Okay, yeah, I think, yeah, like I said, I'll try to remember to link to the editions I have later, so you guys can get any of these if you like them. Yes, In Cold Blood, but that was written by Truman Capote. Oh yeah, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, definitely a modern nonfiction classic, which is about pollution. I did not include poetry in this. I think if we were to include poetry, that's actually a great point, because if we were to include poetry in this, there's, I think, a lot more parity between men and women in poetry. Like, you've got your Dickens, you've got your Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I mean, like, there's, I feel like, a lot more women who have the same kind of prestige as a lot of the male poets. That's a great point. I didn't include them, but yeah. Heidi, I love Heidi. It's so wholesome. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Yeah, yep, I would say so. Yellow Wallpaper. I have not read that, but it's in this Penguin Vitae line. So I think I may get it and give it a try. I definitely know that that's what George Eliot wanted in her time. I don't know if she left like directions about how she wanted her work to be treated posthumously. Like, I don't know if she left like directions about that, but it'd be interesting to find out. Sylvia Plath Journals. Yeah, there you go. Let's see, there you go. I think JKR is probably going to enter the children's canon. think that probably is going to happen. Willa Cather. Okay, I did have a couple I listed of like women authors I have not enjoyed, but who are classics, and I would put Willa Cather in there. I know I feel bad that I don't like her, but I read Oh Pioneers and what was the other one? It was in Nebraska. They're all in Nebraska. Willa Cather, Oh Pioneers, and what was the other one? My Antonia. Yeah. Wasn't for me. But those are two examples. Another classic that I read, and I think it is interesting from a historical standpoint, but to me does not hold up as a work of fiction, is Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, it is also very contentious to teach in terms of as a work of literature rather than a work of history these days, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I think it's a really interesting historical document, but I don't think it's very good. Like, it's not very entertaining. So I think that's one that should move from the literature curricula to purely being on the history curriculum. There we go. Okay, yeah. Irish writers Edna O'Brien, Maeve Brennan, and Alice McDermott. Isabel Allende. Yeah, I've not read Scarlet Pimpernel, but yeah, we were talking earlier. It's not not my favorite, but I know a lot of people enjoy it. Here we go. I found scholarship where I had to read Atlas Shrugged and write about it. I couldn't manage it. Not sure why, how much it was for anyway. Yeah, I would have struggled. Yes. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, sorry, Willa Cather. Yeah, Diary of Anne Frank. It was lovely. I read that as I probably was 14 or 15, and I was very moved by it. Let's see here. Oh, well, Florida. I can't say I'm surprised, just based on the number of times Florida Man shows up in the headlines, but there's got to be some good ones down there, right? By female authors featuring working class characters. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, or I Capture the Castle. Oh, it's sad that it's so hard to think. I mean, definitely, well, working class are like not the elite class. I mean, Toni Morrison, in terms of like a modern writer, definitely comes to mind. I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird, technically, I would say, well, I guess Atticus was a lawyer, but they were of genteel poverty. Let's see here. I mean, it's sad that it's so hard to think of it. Flannery O'Connor's characters tend to be pretty, they're not elite normally. Yeah, I'll have to think about that more. I'm bummed that a bunch don't come to mind. That says a lot. Passing is fantastic. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, a lot of people like Willa Cather. It's just not for me. Octavia Butler, I have, let's see, The Parable of the Sower over there on my TBR shelf, so I'm excited to get to her. Found Handmaid's Tale to be a little free library, and I kind of hate it since it had a Scene on Hulu logo on it. Yeah, I don't love a tie-in copy, but what are you going to do? Octavia Butler. Okay, we got another one saying Florida's education system's not the best. I mean, hey, from Tennessee, I can't be too smug about such things. A female journalist I really enjoy, recommend this bio, Mary McGrory, The First Queen of Journalism by John Norris. There you go. Parable of the Sowers. Okay, good to know. The Bloody Chamber. Yay! I hope you enjoy it. It's a very, it's an intense book. It's not for everyone, but I love it. Here we go. Have you mentioned The Street by Ann Petrie? Written in 1946, I think, a post-Harlem Renaissance masterpiece. I have never heard of that, but appreciate the recommendation. Diary of Anne Frank. Did anyone read Farewell to Manzanar in school? Jean Wadkowski Houston's book focuses on her experience in World War II internment camps. I've never heard of that one. If you were, I I love a World War II Holocaust memoir. And there's a bunch of really good ones. There's one by, what is her name? I don't know where I put it. I don't know where I have it. I don't like how I have my nonfiction organized right now because I can't find anything ever. Okay, I can't think of it right now, but there is a really good memoir from a girl, well, a woman when she wrote it, but a little girl who was in Auschwitz. So in terms of like another female memoir of the Holocaust, I would definitely recommend that if I could remember who the author was or what it was called. I don't know where I have it right now. I'll have to find that later. Yeah. People love it. I love the ideas of it. I just don't love that particular book. Nice. No, it's okay. It's a good book. It's worth recommending. Here's a good one. Marion Zimmer Bradley. Oh, let's see here. Did she write The Myths of Avalon? Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. The Myths of Avalon was like contraband at my fundamentalist school. It was a lot for little fundamentalist Mara to process. A genre classic, perhaps. Joyce Carol Oates, for sure, for modern classics. Yeah. Let's see here. People loving The Yellow Wallpaper. That makes me excited. Edith Wharton. Yep, for sure. Caddy Woodlawn. Nope. Oh, is that one of the Willa Cather? Yeah, no, it was my Antonia. If you're interested in nonfiction from Brazil, there is Child of the Dark, The Diary of Carolina Maria de Jesus by Carolina Maria de Jesus. I don't know how good the translation is, though. Okay, there we go. Yes, Frances Hodgson Burnett. Patricia Highsmith, yeah, great point. Talented Mr. Ripley, et cetera, et cetera. I've not read anything from her yet, but I have a big old Everyman's Library compilation that I'm going to dive into at some point. Yes, okay, good. I'm hoping you will enjoy The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I absolutely love it. I mean, it's hard to say a classic is underhyped, but it feels like it's an underhyped classic because it's so good. Yeah, I think that The Secret History by Donna Tartt is going to end up being a modern classic for sure. Louise de Vilmorin, Diana Wynne Jones, yes, Howl's Moving Castle for sure. Oh yeah, Pearl S. Buck. So I'm going to tell you guys, I should give The Good Earth a try. This is a situation where a movie ruined a book potentially for me because has anybody seen the old school adaptation of The Good Earth with like horrible yellow face, and they won Oscars for it. So that is the version of The Good Earth that I know, and it has put me off from reading the actual book, which is like honestly blasphemous. I should get over that and try to read it at some point. The Professor's House by Willa Cather. Maybe, we'll see. I should say I tend to be a hard sell on American classics in general, so I'm sure that's also my bias. Read the classic noir novel Vera Casperi's Laura. It's a really good movie. As we're watching God. Oh, yeah. That's a good point. The Color Purple. Yes. Oh, Maya Angelou. Yeah. Maya Angelou. Wow. I know why the Caged Bird Sings destroyed me. I read that in high school, and I don't think I was ready for it. Yeah. I think I read that in high school. Pretty sure. I know I've read excerpts of it. I think I read the whole thing in high school. I've reached the point in my life where that I didn't write down that I read it. I'm not ever totally sure. Flaubert writes women in Madame Bovary. I've actually never read Madame Bovary. It's one I need to get to. Dawn, Hate Humanity. There you go. The Color Purple, The Bell Jar. Yes. Would Marjorie Allenham count as a mystery genre classic? Yeah, I think for sure. Dorothy Sayers, I'm doing a read through of her stuff right now and I'm struggling, but I think she would also count as a classic. So yeah, I think for sure. There we go. Nice. Laura Ingalls Wilder. Yeah, I think so. I think Little House on the Prairie, I'm not sure. I think that's one that may age out of the canon. Then again, some of these other ones haven't, so who knows, but we'll see. It's showing its age, I think, more as time goes on. Leonora Carrington, she wrote surrealist magical realism stuff. Never heard of her. Mary Poppins, good point. Oh man, yeah, The Mist of Avalon. Go. Unfortunately, collected the Mist of Avalon series before finding out the author. Oh God, I didn't know that. That's awful. Well, there you go. Possessing the Secret Joy is another great one by Alice Walker. Very intense, but then again, so is The Color Purple. Yeah. Oh, yikes. Yikes on bikes. Okay. Well, I think we could officially put Marion Zimmer Bradley in the dustbin. I don't need any of that. Let's see here. Wow, we're all collectively finding out about her together. Oh man. Yeah, that's awful. Okay, The Good Earth movie. The book was only okay. Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, the movie is not good. Yeah, Josephine Tay, I would put in that same category with Christie and the others. But Googling her is nightmare fuel. Yeah, not a good person. Let's see here. The book The Good Earth made my late mama famous, so you should give the book a whirl. Okay. Someday. Yeah, Audre Lorde, I think, is definitely a modern classic. Yeah, agreed. It was required reading. Wow. Yeah. Mary Oliver, I agree for modern poet. Yeah, I love her stuff. I love Shirley Jackson. Let's see. Oh, man. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, Anne Radcliffe. That's another one that she's on my classics TBR this year. Sorry, I keep looking back here as if it's for books I didn't pull. I should stop doing that. Yes, Anne Radcliffe. Trying to read some of that this year. Sister Outsider is fantastic. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I think we're all being collectively educated / traumatized by this knowledge about Marion Zimmer Bradley. Elizabeth Googe on my TBR. Googe. Heard good things. Good to know. Yeah, we're putting her in the trash. Yes, I would definitely say I think Ursula Le Guin is going to be a classic. East Lynne by Ellen Wood for my Victorian popular fiction course. It was published in 1861. Never heard of it. There are so many lesser known women of the Victorian era. Like, I feel like I'm constantly learning about, like, oh, she's got like 20 books and I've never heard of her, but these sound great. Yeah, the Joy Luck Club, I think definitely for, I guess, modern classics. I think, didn't that come out in the 70s or 80s? Yeah, for sure. In the Time of Butterflies by Julia Alvarez is a great piece of historical fiction and should be a modern classic. Lady Audley's Secrets, yes, that's a good one. Mysteries of Udolpho. Yeah, I don't know that it's going to be amazing for me, but I feel like I want to read it as like a seminal work of the history of the romance genre. So Barbara Kingsolver and Maxine Hong Kingston. So Barbara Kingsolver, I tried and did not enjoy. But I know I'm in the minority there. Just not for me. Yeah, Neo Marsh. Nio Marsh is one I enjoy. Anna Cavan. Robin Hobb. I agree, Bethany. I think that Robin Hobb is becoming a modern genre classic. I mean, she loves to stab my little heart out of my chest. So if that makes you a classic, then she definitely qualifies. Watch the Books and the Things channel for more classics recommendations. Okay, cool. Shout out to them. Earthseas, yes. Yeah, I don't know it's going to be a great time, but we'll see. I have not read Mary Renault. I have a book from her called The Fires from Heaven on my TBR, but I haven't gotten to her yet. Yeah, we talked about the Bell Jar earlier. That's one that's like on my pile of shame, but I need to get to it. I'm just curious, we're talking about female writers. Do you think Shakespeare was a man or a woman? I am somebody that used to be like a hobby of mine, was like reading about Shakespeare conspiracy theories. And I've come to the conclusion, I just think he was a dude. Like, I don't believe any of the conspiracy theories. So that's my take, but Iris Murdoch, yep. Golden Age of Gay Lit. There you go. Yeah, Iris Murdoch I've read one thing from and I did really enjoy it. I should read more from her. For classic Sappho's poetry, there you go. Yeah, I read the Poisonwood Bible and didn't enjoy it. And then I also read her memoir about like living from the land or whatever. Was it like Animal, Mineral, whatever that was? And I also didn't like it. So I think she's just not for me. Elizabeth Acevedo and Sandra Cisneros feel like they could become YA classics. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Especially Elizabeth Acevedo, since she's got so much, since she also has that poetry component, I could definitely see that. Yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I just didn't like her writing. Nydia Okorafor, oh my gosh. Yes, I hope that she becomes a classic for sure. And like on the same realm, just in terms of like really imaginative, speculative fiction, N.K. Jemisin, I feel like is well on her way. There we go. Oh yeah, I've read that one. Well, part of the journey of a Robin Hobb is the slog, I think. Oh, yeah. Let's see. McCaffrey. Snaps to the Bell Jar audiobook from Maggie Gyllenhaal. For French literature, I think Amélie Nothomb will become a classic. I've never heard of her. Good to know. Animal Vegetable Miracle. There you go. House on Mango Street. Yes, to N.K. Jemisin. Micaiah Johnson's first novel, The Space Between Worlds, was one of my favorites this year. Fantastic book. And Shakespeare theories are fun, but I believe he was just a guy, not a woman, and not secretly that Francis Bacon dude. No. Yeah, there's so many theories, and none of them have seen. It's sort of like the Occam's razor, like whatever the simplest solution is likely to be the answer. I've never seen anything like, none of those complicated theories have ever been too persuasive to me. So, have you read Fall on Your Knees? I have not, but I think she is. Yeah, I do think she's a Canadian author. There you go. Well, yeah, I think Louise Erdrich, I think she's going to end up being entering the classics canon. She's on my list of ones I think will. But anyway, I will go back and write up a description in the description box, all the ones we covered, with some links and stuff if people like some of these specific editions. But yeah, I think hopefully this was a good reminder that there are plenty of great female classic authors and modern classic authors. I think we're getting more and more all the time, as I mentioned at the beginning, as we have sort of, some archaeology into the past and kind of unearthing lost treasures. And I think that it will only broaden in terms of sort of parity between men, women, and non-binary people as time goes on. So let's see, a couple of parting recommendations here. I've not read a lot of her, but she did have a collection called Imitations during the pandemic. So if you're looking for something timely from her, a translated classic from Tove Jansson from Finland. There you go. Robin McKinley. Yep. She's got a lot of like fairy tale retellings, I believe. White Teeth as a place to start with Zadie Smith. on beauty. Yay, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Yes, I will definitely have a link to the shirt. Alcott, Austen, Bronte, Plath. Let's see here. Zelda Fitzgerald. Well, she really wrote a lot of Scott Fitzgerald stuff, so there you go. Anya Seton. Yeah, imitate. Okay, there you go. My pleasure. Well, I don't think we have live stream next week, but there will be a different pre-recorded video. Oh, actually about translations. So if you're interested in classics, you may be interested in that conversation. And I appreciate everybody chatting. So we'll be off for live stream next week. We'll be back the week after that. And yeah, hope you guys are having a good evening, and I will just talk to you guys soon. Bye.